41 inches the morning, September 29th, 20 to 21, a 911 call comes into the Harris County Dispatch in Texas. And what the operator hears on the other end is a 17-year-old kid crying, panicking, saying words that nobody can ever be ready for. I think it was a dream. I stabbed her. And then it wasn't a dream. Let that sink in for a second. The victim is 17 years old. The killer is also 17. They were born on the same day. They shared the same womb. And according to absolutely everyone who knew them, they were best friends. And then he called 911 and said, I just killed my sister. Oh God, I thought it was a dream. Welcome to the strangest case I've covered in a while. Because there's nothing here that should be in a murder case. No motive, no conflict, no history of hatred. Just a dead girl, her brother with a knife in his hands, and a defense that you only hear once every decade. Sleepwalking. He says he was asleep, that it was a nightmare, that he woke up with the knife already in his sister's neck. The jury didn't believe him. But here's what's interesting. Even after finding him guilty, they asked the judge for leniency. What did they see in this case that made them doubt even after their own verdict? Let's break it down. Katy, Texas, a suburb of Houston. If you're not from America, picture the typical American suburb from the movies. Identical houses, neat lawns, kids on bikes, moms with strollers, dads grilling barbecue on weekends. This is a place where nothing happens. This is a place people move to raise kids in safety. Crime here means a stolen bike or a broken window. Not murders. Definitely not murders within a family. And certainly not twins killing each other. The Elliott family fit perfectly into this picture of suburban bliss. The father, Michael, a stay-at-home dad. Yep, you heard that right. He stayed home with the kids. The mother, Kathy, worked. She was a manager at Girl Scouts of America. They had 3 kids, the older daughter, Elizabeth, and the twins, Benjamin and Meghan. They lived in a house on Brown Meadow Court, a quiet street, in a quiet neighborhood, in a quiet town. Nothing special. Ben and Meghan were both 17. They both went to Cypress Park High School. Neighbors saw them every day. They'd walk to the bus stop together, come back together. One neighbor said he once saw Ben open an umbrella over Meghan when it started raining. And that detail, it got to me because it's such a small thing, such a tiny gesture, but it's exactly those little things that paint the picture of how people relate to each other. He opened an umbrella over his sister. He was protecting her. Let's talk about Meghan because she's the victim and she deserves to be talked about as a person, not as an item in a police report. Meghan was quiet, very quiet, an introvert by nature. As a kid, she was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Not severe, but enough to make social interactions hard for her. She loved to draw, was into animation, read a lot, wrote poetry, a creative soul who preferred the world inside her head to the world outside. She wasn't popular at school. Kids with autism often become targets for bullying. They don't read social cues the way others do. They act weird by teenage standards. They're vulnerable. And Meghan was vulnerable. But she had Ben. Their mom, Kathy, said that Ben took on the role of Meghan's protector from early childhood. Even though they were the same age, literally born minutes apart, he acted like the older brother. When someone messed with Meghan, Ben stepped in. There's a story the family told. Once on the school bus, someone started picking on Meghan. She was probably around 12. Ben jumped up from his seat and started yelling at the bullies. He got so worked up, so emotional about someone hurting his sister that he started crying. Right there on the bus, in front of everyone. A 12-year-old boy crying while defending his sister. That tells you something about him, doesn't it? A family friend, Drew Whitecar, testified at trial. She'd known the Elliots for years. She said, when Meghan felt uncomfortable in a situation, she would walk up to Ben and just stand next to him. She'd look up at him. She adored him. And then she added, he was proud of protecting her. He liked that role. Now here's what matters. Prosecutors spent months, literally months, trying to find any conflict between the twins, any serious argument, any reason for resentment, anything. They combed through their texts, checked their phones, interviewed friends, classmates, teachers, neighbors. They looked for cheating, jealousy, money, secrets, everything that usually becomes a motive for murder. Nothing. Prosecutor Meghan Long said at trial, "We looked, we tried very hard to find some problem between them. We didn't find one." And this is a key detail of the case, because in the vast majority of murders, there's a motive, there's a reason. Maybe the reason is crazy, maybe it doesn't justify the crime, but it exists. Here, nothing. A void. Two people who loved each other and one of them killed the other without a reason. How is that possible? September 28th, 2021. Tuesday. A regular school night at the Elliott house. The family had dinner together, nothing special. Then everyone went to their rooms to do their own thing. Michael, the dad, stayed up late. He was known in the family as the guy who could stay up until 3 or 4 in the morning watching YouTube or reading stuff online. That night, he went to bed around 3. Kathy, the mom, went to bed earlier. She worked, had to get up in the morning. Meghan went to her room, changed into her pajamas, went to sleep. Regular evening, nothing unusual. Ben also went to his room, but he didn't fall asleep right away. He lay in bed scrolling through his phone, Reddit, YouTube, whatever. Typical teenage behavior in 2021. And here's where it gets interesting from an evidence standpoint, because Ben's phone recorded everything. I want you to understand just how detailed modern smartphones are at tracking our actions. This is important for this case. Your phone knows when you unlock it, when you lock it, how many steps you take and where you go, what apps you open, what you search online. If you've got your health app on, it records your physical activity down to the step. For investigators, this is a gold mine because the phone doesn't lie. The phone just records data. And the data from Ben's phone told this story. He was active all night, scrolling through stuff, watching stuff. At 4:06 a.m., he unplugged his phone from the charger. At 4:08, the phone recorded 8 steps. That's about 18 feet. The distance from his room to Meghan's room. At 4:17, the phone was locked. And then silence. 24 minutes with no activity. The next action, 4:41 a.m. Phone unlocked. 911 dialed. 24 minutes. What happened during those 24 minutes? According to Ben, he was asleep, then sleepwalking, then he woke up. According to prosecutors, he was fully conscious and knew what he was doing. Let me tell you about the 911 call. I can't quote it word for word, but I'll give you the gist. Ben tells the operator he stabbed his sister, says he thought it was a dream, that he woke up and realized it was real. He can barely speak. He's whispering. The operator asks him to speak louder, but he keeps whispering. Prosecutor Maroon Kutani would later say at trial, "I think he was whispering because he didn't want his parents to wake up. He didn't want them to see what he'd done. That's why he wasn't screaming, wasn't calling for help. He was whispering into the phone." That's an interesting take. You could look at it differently. Maybe he was in shock. Maybe his voice just wouldn't work. People react to traumatic events in different ways. But the fact remains, he didn't wake his parents right away. He called 911 first. 7 minutes into the call, you can hear his parents start screaming on the recording. They woke up, either heard something, or Ben called them. At 4:42 a.m., 1 minute after the call, Harris County Sheriff's deputies arrived on scene. They found Ben in Meghan's room. He was on top of her, doing chest compressions. The 911 operator was giving him instructions over the phone. One of the officers would later say at trial that Ben was doing it right, properly. He would have stepped in if he'd seen the kid doing something wrong. But it didn't matter anymore. Meghan was dead. The autopsy showed 2 stab wounds to the neck. One of them was deep. It cut through a major artery and vein. The medical examiner said that with Wounds like these, death happens within minutes, maybe even faster. By the time paramedics arrived, Meghan had no pulse. She wasn't breathing on her own. Most likely, she was dead before Ben even started trying to resuscitate her. And here's an important detail. Ben told investigators he stabbed his sister once, but the autopsy showed 2 wounds. That's not a critical contradiction. Maybe he doesn't remember exactly. Maybe everything got mixed up in the panic, but prosecutors used it. Now, about the knife. This is an important part of the story. Ben didn't go to the kitchen and grab the first knife he found in a drawer. He didn't grab something random. He used a specific knife, a U.S. Air Force survival knife that belonged to his father. This isn't a kitchen knife. This is a serious weapon. Heavy, massive, with a thick blade designed for extreme outdoor situations, like if you need to chop through something or defend yourself against an animal. The Elliots had all kinds of gear at home. Michael was into hunting. The garage had practice swords, air guns, a rapier, that's a long, thin sword in case you don't know, and all sorts of camping equipment. But Ben took this particular knife, and here's what the father, Michael Elliott, testified at trial. He said Ben was enamored with this knife. That's a strong word. It means something like being in love with it. He also said Ben had a fixation on this knife. And most importantly, Michael gave this knife to Ben the day before the murder. Literally the day before. Why did he do it? The trial didn't give a clear answer. Maybe Ben asked. Maybe the father thought it was time for his son to have his own knife. They liked camping after all. Maybe it was just a gift. But the fact is, the day before the murder, Ben received the murder weapon from his own father. Prosecutor Megan Long said in her closing statement, "This is not a coincidence. The knife he received the night before is the same knife he used to kill his sister." On Ben's phone, investigators found a note titled, "Survival Hiking, a list of things for a hike." The knife was on the list. Ben's interrogation lasted several hours. Detective Freder Munoz conducted it calmly, methodically, no pressure. Ben told his version of events. He said he went to bed but couldn't fall asleep for a long time, was scrolling through his phone, Reddit, whatever, then finally knocked out. And he had a nightmare. He dreamed that he took the knife, went to his sister's room, stabbed her, and then he woke up and realized it wasn't a dream. He was standing over Meghan. The knife was in her neck. She was making a sound. Ben described it as a half scream. He says, "I stabbed her, and then suddenly I wasn't anymore." Weird phrasing. Like, was in a dream, fell out of the dream mid-action. Then he pulled the knife out. That was a mistake. The knife was blocking the wound, slowing the bleeding. When you pull it out, blood starts gushing. Then he grabbed a pillow from Meghan's bed and pressed it against the wound, trying to stop the blood. Then he realized it wasn't helping. Ran to his room, grabbed his phone, called 911. The detective asked him, "Have you ever had realistic nightmares? The kind where everything feels absolutely real and you can't tell the dream from reality?" Ben said, yes, he had. He also said he'd never seen a doctor about sleep problems, that he wasn't taking any medications, and hadn't had any alcohol or drugs that night. For 2 hours, the detective didn't tell him Meghan was dead. Ben kept asking, "How is she? Is she going to be okay? Are they going to save her?" The detective gave vague answers, like, "Last I heard, paramedics are checking her out." When 2 hours later, the detective finally told him the truth, Ben responded with one sound. That's it. Prosecutors later used this moment. They asked, "What kind of reaction is that? Where are the tears? Where's the screaming? Where's the shock?" But people react differently to news like that. Some scream, some cry, some go numb. You can't judge someone's guilt by how they react to traumatic information. Although, sure, that's weird. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't weird. Now, about the defense, because this is where the most interesting part of the case begins. Ben's lawyers, Wes Rucker and Carrie Hart, built their defense on sleepwalking. They claimed Ben didn't control his actions, that he was asleep. that he bears no responsibility for what his body did while his consciousness was switched off. This is a rare defense, very rare, but not unprecedented. In 1987, a Canadian named Kenneth Parks drove 14 miles to his mother-in-law's house and killed her. He claimed he was asleep the whole time, and you know what? He was acquitted. In North Carolina, a father named Joseph Mitchell strangled his child. He said he was sleepwalking. He was also acquitted. So there are precedents. Rare, but they exist. The defense hired a sleep expert, Dr. Gerald Simmons. He's a neurologist, a specialist in sleep disorders with years of experience. He agreed to examine Ben. Initially, Simmons was skeptical. He'd seen a lot of people who tried to fake sleep problems to avoid responsibility. He wasn't about to just take someone's word for it. He conducted 2 sleep studies on Ben, polysomnography. That's when they hook you up to a bunch of sensors and record all your brain activity, movements, breathing while you sleep. And he changed his mind. Simmons found that Ben falls into what's called slow wave sleep very quickly, abnormally quickly. That's the deep phase of sleep where sleepwalking happens. Most people need time to get there. Ben got there almost instantly. He also found that Ben has a very hard time waking up, and that he can carry on conversations, answer questions, while technically still being asleep. Simmons testified at trial. He said, Ben definitely killed his sister. He did it, there's no question, the knife was in his hands, but he didn't do it voluntarily. There was no motivation. He wasn't in control of his actions. After the verdict, Simmons told reporters, I think the jury got it wrong. And there were witnesses who confirmed that Ben had sleepwalked before. Elizabeth, the older sister, told a story from childhood. An old story, she was about 14 then. The twins were around 10 or 11. In the middle of the night, Meghan woke Elizabeth up. She was scared. Ben was standing in their doorway, eyes open, but the look was empty. He wasn't responding when they called his name, just standing there staring. Elizabeth got up and walked over to him, touched his shoulder, said, Ben, go to bed. He turned around and left, silently, without a single word. In the morning, he remembered nothing. The family laughed about it back then, like, Ben sleepwalks, how funny. Nobody thought it could be dangerous. There was also a childhood friend, Anand Singh. He told a story about a sleepover around 2016 to 5 years before the murder. Kids were sleeping over at the Elliott's. In the morning, Anand woke up and went to the living room. He saw Ben on the couch, eyes open, holding a donut, eating it. But he was staring into space. His look was completely absent, like a zombie. Anand said, good morning, to him. And Ben kind of switched on, looked around confused, looked at the donut in his hand, and said something like, that's weird. I was dreaming I was eating a donut, and here it is actually in my hand. He didn't remember getting up, going to the kitchen, getting the donut. To him, it was a dream. The family brushed it off back then too, laughed about it. Nobody took Ben to a doctor, but the prosecutors had their own version, and they had serious arguments. First, the phone data. Ben was active on his phone until 4:17 a.m. At 4:41, he called 911. 24 minutes between the last activity and the call. Can you fall asleep deeply enough for sleepwalking in 24 minutes, commit a murder in your sleep, and wake up? The defense expert Simmons said, yes, theoretically possible. Ben falls asleep very fast. Prosecutors said, no, that's too short a window. And also, the phone recorded that Ben turned off his school alarm. Sleepwalkers don't turn off alarms. That's a conscious action. Second, the lack of blood spatter. This is an important point, and prosecutors hammered on it. With wounds of this type, 2 stabs to the neck, 1 deep major vessels cut, blood should be everywhere. On the walls, on the ceiling, on the furniture. It's physics. Arterial pressure pushes blood out like a fountain. But in Meghan's room, there was no blood spatter. The only thing soaked in blood was the pillow. Ben said he used the pillow to stop the bleeding after he pulled out the knife. But prosecutor Meghan Long proposed another version. I think he wanted to cover her face, muffle the scream. The only way there wouldn't be blood spatter, the pillow would have had to be on her face when he pulled out the knife. That's a disturbing picture. Pillow on her face, knife in her neck, brother standing over her. Impossible to prove, but also impossible to disprove. Third, and this might be the strongest scientific argument from the prosecution, prosecutors brought in their own sleep expert, Dr. Mark Pressman, and he explained something important to the jury about the physiology of sleep. There are two main phases of sleep, REM and non-REM. REM is the rapid eye movement phase. That's when we dream. Vivid, lifelike, sometimes nightmarish dreams. Non-REM is the slow wave sleep phase. That's when sleepwalking happens. A person can get up, walk around, even perform complex actions, but they're not dreaming. Their consciousness is offline. These phases don't overlap. You're either in REM and dreaming or in non-REM and able to sleepwalk, not both at once. So what did Ben say? He said he was having a nightmare, that he had a dream where he was stabbing his sister and woke up in the middle of doing it. But according to science, that's impossible. If he was sleepwalking, non-REM, he couldn't have been dreaming. If he was dreaming, REM, he couldn't have been sleepwalking, non-REM. His testimony contradicts basic sleep physiology. Prosecutors played on this. They said he's lying. He made up this story about a nightmare because he doesn't understand how sleepwalking actually works. He thought it would sound convincing. I was dreaming and I woke up doing it. But science says that doesn't happen. The trial started February 18th, 2025. Lasted a week. The defense said, how could a kid who adored his sister, who protected her his whole life, how could he commit such a crime without some explanation, without a motive, without a reason? The only explanation is that he wasn't in control of himself. The prosecution said, we don't have a motive, we admit that, but we have evidence of intent. The phone, the pillow, the knife he got the day before. Not a coincidence. Defense attorney Wes Rucker told the jury, this isn't some made-up nonsense. This isn't a creative defense. This is a real phenomenon. Sleepwalking exists. People have committed murder in their sleep and been acquitted. Prosecutor Meghan Long responded, look at the evidence, not the emotions. The evidence. He was on his phone 20 minutes before the murder. He took a knife he'd received the day before. He knew what he was doing. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. The verdict, guilty of murder. But then something unusual happened. After announcing the verdict, the jury passed a note to the judge. They were asking for leniency in sentencing. Think about that. They had just found him guilty of murder. They decided he did it consciously, that he was lying about sleepwalking. And immediately they're asking the judge to be lenient. What does that mean? Maybe they had doubts. Maybe there was enough evidence for guilty, but not enough for them to be 100% sure. Maybe they looked at this kid who was 17 when this happened, who had never been in trouble with the law before, who by all accounts was a normal kid, and couldn't reconcile that image with the image of a cold-blooded killer. Maybe they felt sorry for the family. Parents who lost a daughter and are now losing a son. In Texas, murder can get you anywhere from 5 to 99 years or life. The prosecution asked for 40 years. The defense asked for 5, the minimum. Judge Danilo Lacayo gave 15. He explained his decision. Said he considered Ben's age at the time of the crime, 17 years old. No criminal history, good behavior while out on bail, absence of motive. And he said something that got to me. I looked at similar cases with similar circumstances. There aren't any. A case like this doesn't exist. There's no template for this case. No precedent to fall back on. A twin kills a twin, claims he was asleep. The jury doesn't believe him but asks for leniency. That's never happened before. 15 years. Ben will get out when he's 36. With good behavior, maybe earlier. Parole is possible after 7.5 years. He'll have a life after prison. Meghan is forever 17. Kathy Elliott, the mother, gave an interview after the trial. She said, "This is scary as hell. If this could happen to us, it could happen to anyone who has sleep problems." She still believes Ben isn't guilty, that it was an accident, that her son is also a victim of this tragedy. And I understand why she thinks that. Because the alternative, that her son coldly murdered her daughter without any reason, is impossible to accept. That would destroy any parent. But here's the thing. Meghan was her daughter too. And Meghan is dead. And someone has to answer for that. Michael, the father, cried at the trial. The prosecutor showed him a photo from the autopsy for identification. He looked, said, "Yes, that's Meghan," and broke down. This man gave his son the knife the day before the murder. How does he live with that? You know what gets to me most about this story? Not the knife, not the phone data, not the scientific debates about sleep phases. It's Meghan's last seconds. The prosecutor painted a picture in his closing argument. Her last memory is being yanked out of sleep. Her brother standing over her, knife in her neck, pillow on her face. Maybe she didn't even understand what was happening. Maybe she died before she could fully wake up. The medical examiner said, death within minutes, maybe within seconds. Or maybe she had a second, 1 second of clarity. When she opened her eyes and saw her twin brother's face, the person who had protected her all her life, the person she trusted more than anyone in the world, and that face with a knife in his hands was the last thing she saw. I don't know what's worse, not knowing anything or knowing that. So that's the case. No clear answers, no moral satisfaction, no sense that justice was served. Because what justice is there here? A 17-year-old girl is dead. Her brother is in prison. The family is destroyed. The parents lost both children, one in the morgue, the other behind bars. And nobody, including the jury that convicted him, can say with full certainty what happened in that room between 4:17 and 4:41 inches the morning. Was he asleep? Was he awake? If he was asleep, it's a tragedy without anyone to blame. An accident. Horrible, unimaginable, but an accident. If he was awake, why? What for? What made a boy who protected his sister his whole life take a knife and kill her? There's no answer, and maybe there never will be. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Did the jury get it wrong? Is 15 years a fair sentence? Too much or too little? And the big question, do you believe a person can kill in their sleep? That it's actually possible to commit murder without realizing what you're doing? If you're new here, subscribe. We break down cases like this regularly. Until next time, take care of yourselves, lock your doors at night,